Thank you so much. So you guys can see my screen, is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Just wanted to check. Okay. All right. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Carleton University is built is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. So my name is Deanna Whelan, and I teach at Carleton University, which is in Ottawa, Canada, because I don't know how broad people are coming from who knows where. So welcome to everybody. So this particular course, it is a third-year specific statistics course within the Department of Psychology. So part of the reason why I chose this particular course to go after is that I've taught it since about 2013, and I teach it very regularly. And every time I've taught the course, I have tried different modifications, tweaking this, adding that, taking this out, adjusting textbooks, you name it. I've constantly tried to evolve this course and try to fix it with some success at different points in time. So it was a course that I had lots of different experience in playing around with. In terms of one of the other elements that has come up a couple times today is the DFW rate. So D letter grades, failures, and withdrawal rates. And the 5-year average for that particular course is 22%. The bigger issue with not just it being 22%, which is a bit high, definitely, but the bigger issue in my mind was that when people were part of that DFW group, they didn't re-enroll. So the bulk of that 22% is students that are withdrawing from the course. At Carleton, we can withdraw from a course up until the very last day of the term, which makes it that it's very rare to actually hand out F letter grades, because if you know you're not going to succeed, you can pull out of the course quite very late in the game. So that withdrawal rate is much larger. Of that withdrawal rate, very few percentage of students would actually re-enroll in the course at a later time. Because the course is a required course, that basically means that, well, what's happening with these students? And what we've, in trying to understand what was happening, we found that many of the students were switching from the honors course into a general degree, so that, or they were switching out of psychology entirely and switching to some other program, or they were leaving the university completely. So these were all major metrics of a 22% loss of our student population was definitely problematic. So that was one of the things that inspired me to go after fixing this particular course. So the course itself is referred to as Design and Analysis in Psychological Research. It is a full year course, so all the way from September all the way through to April in your typical year. It's listed as 4 hours a week with both lecture and tutorial. I'll note an issue with that in just a second. The prerequisites to take the course are research methods and also introduction to statistics. So that should already be a background before being in the course. It is specific to the honors students. So whether it's a Bachelor of Art or Bachelor of Science, we offer both. That is how that runs. And in a typical year, there's 5 sections that are offered in the fall, winter, and another 1 or 2 sections in the summer. So it's a very high demand course. And there's 50 to 90 students per section. So I think this also covers and helps people sort of shift in terms of our expectations, because I know some of the other courses that have been talked about have been a bit smaller. So one thing to note is that in that 4 hours a week during our regular fall winter session, we actually normally get scheduled as 2 1.5-hour sessions. And I'm sure as you're all statistics people, you'll realize that 2 1.5-hour sections adds to 3 and not 4. And that is something that was a common issue in the fall winter, was that we didn't actually get that 4th hour scheduled. In the summer, we could have the 4-hour sessions scheduled, but it would normally be listed as 4 hours twice a week, and it's a full 4-hour chunk, which is just unruly as well. So trying to deal with all sorts of issues in how to go after this course, thus the concept of reengineering.
Yeah.
So to start with, yeah.
Sorry, the toolbar, the Zoom toolbar is up on your slide.
Is it sitting there? Oh, sorry. I can try and move it over here. Does that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So the experiential learning element in terms of, so flipping the classroom, that was definitely one of the things that I really wanted to bring in to the overall experience, was that I took one of the 1.5 hour sections of our class time and switched them into hands-on learning. At Carleton, we refer to that as experiential learning elements, although it is also part of that flipped classroom concept. And the idea of that hands-on element was specifically to try and get students to engage with the content and actually utilize some of the tools that are there, while myself and TAs can assist them in working through designed content. Our course is specifically required to cover some form of a statistical package. The package that I use for this course is SPSS, and that is primarily because of being in the city of Ottawa. We are a government town, and there are a large number of government-based summer jobs that students are able to apply for that specifically list SPSS as a requirement. So by using SPSS as a statistical package, it opens the doors for those potential jobs versus any other statistical package does not. So that was one of the reasons why I still use SPSS, although I'm not set on it. It's more of a trying to get students jobs for the summer. Oh. Sorry. There. Okay. Additional changes, I added in online videos to assist in covering the content within having less class time. I added in quizzes, which I'm glad I did. So I worked with the pedagogy on that one, yep, to assess the content of the videos to help make sure that they're going through them. I also posted the answer keys for each of the weekly activities with more detailed, lengthy explanations for the common errors and common misconceptions when they engaged with the content. So that way, whether they engaged with the activity or not, everybody had access to the answer keys. And then I also restructured the entire course into 6 specific themes. Each theme has multiple smaller activities that they go through in class, then and quizzes as well. Then we get into a larger test and a larger project in order to sort of bring it all together. And of course, in stats, everything builds on top of everything else. In terms of the content of how I structured the themes, though, I did try to really go after some different changes to tackle common issues. So for example, I don't know how everyone else learns stats, but generally it was always taught t-test, t-test. And so you did independent, then dependent. And then we're taught ANOVA, and it was independent ANOVA and then dependent ANOVA. And the concept of independent and dependent sometimes gets blurred in students' minds. And so I restructured things into more dependent concept and independent concepts. So you covered all the dependent tests together and all the independent tests together to try and help better clarity in students' perceptions. So that was some of the completely redesigning of the content. In terms of the weekly flow that we would go through, there'd be the 1-hour video lecture. Then there would be a quiz that students would get to complete. It was untimed, so students could go through it as they need be. And then I would jump into an in-person lecture, which was an 1.5 hours because we had those 2 1.5 hour schedules. And then there'd be a 1.5 hour hands-on activity component. So frequently we were in SPSS and doing specific analyses. Other times I would have students engage with something like G-Power, and we'd learn about a priori sample size testing and all sorts of stuff. But it was very hands-on designing the elements and working with statistics. In terms of the overall new content that was created for this course, I created 15 videos, 15 online quizzes to assess the content of the videos, and 18 hands-on activities. The content that remained consistent with prior versions of the course, all course objectives and the statistical analyses that were covered remained consistent. The tests themselves and the projects themselves were highly similar, even though there was the rejigging. So you can't compare test 1 versus test 1 because content was restructured, but by the end of the year, you can compare all the metrics that were covered. So in essence, what I was trying to do was not change the final destination, but change the path on how we got to the final destination. So the results, what happened? The historical 5-year average was that 22%. My particular, the 1 year prior to average of my DFW was 16%. So that's the most direct comparison where it's still my teaching style, my way of asking questions and all the rest of it. That stayed completely consistent. When I flipped and redesigned the whole thing and re-smashed it all back together again, the first year I had a DFW rate of 0. So yeah, so that was some smashing success. And obviously I was a clear fluke, so better do it again. So year 2, I had 2 sections of the same course. In section 1, I had a DFW rate of 5%, and the other section, I had a DFW rate of 2.7%. So huge difference from 22 or 16, whichever one you'd like to consider the better metric or the better comparison, and a massive difference in terms of students actually getting through the course successfully. But that's not the only thing we can look at in terms of results. I also surveyed students about how they felt about everything, and overall students felt that the activities very much so helped their learning. Just as important is that having students actually actively engage with the content when myself and TAs were actively in the room to assist them and answer questions and help guide them, significantly lowered their stress and anxiety surrounding statistics. And students did acknowledge that the quizzes motivated them to watch the video content. So that was all good stuff. In terms of the grades, I can say that the average course grades went up by about 10%. The overall, because I was worried, well, maybe we've changed how we're grading, because sometimes that can shift a bit from year to year. I did go through and compare equivalent grades. So I took a B+ paper and a B+ paper and an A- paper and an A- paper from the end of the year and compared the two to see how things were done. And it actually turned out that we were actually using the rubric, we were being more strict. So it should have actually lowered the class grades, not higher. So 10% didn't represent how much the improvement was. That was actually low. Oops. So unintentional, but that was there. Some of the other elements that are important to note is that students were much more likely to use office hours for both myself and TAs. They created a great sense of community. Students had a lot more banter and chit chat amongst each other, and everyone sort of was getting along and working together. And so that was a wonderful sense of community that was created in an otherwise very large university department that we don't have that, unfortunately. And we also got lots of comments that, thanks, that was fun, after an activity when people would be leaving, and this is my favorite class. And these are generally unheard of comments in terms of statistics. So that was always very inspirational. And it is also important to note that my teaching scores are not higher when I teach in this, they are lower. So I generally find that the students that are not as strong do not like being made to do their work. It's sort of like being a good parent, telling your kids they have to go to bed on time and actually brush their teeth is not favorably seen by the children when they're going through the process. So I sort of see it in that regard. In terms of next steps, and for this past year, one of the things that I wanted to do was sort of see what would happen if we had other people try to adapt the course design. So Dr. Cecilia Jorgensen has just been teaching 2 sections following the format. So we're just at the end of the course now. And then other changes I've been trying to do is figure out how to make it so the activities are more scalable when we have lots of different sections sort of trying to do the same thing. And one method that I've used is creating surveys on student information. So, and some of them is just sort of date-like questions. So one of the things that we had is, have you never, ever have I questions, and drunk texted someone, or texted someone when drunk, or jumped out of a plane with a parachute, or and so just get to know you type questions is some of the survey content to try to stay away from sensitive topics. And that allows us for each of the different sections that's running to have its own data set to be using for the activities, but the activity questions to actually be consistent. In terms of how we managed to run things during COVID, where everything was stuck to a fully online format, was that the all lecture content, all of it went fully online. And then we had synchronous sessions that were done in Zoom using the breakout rooms for students, and myself and TAs would bounce around between the breakout rooms, was how we did it for this past year. Yes, but not as good as in person is how I would characterize the results. Finally, in terms of other changes that I made for this year to try and adapt to the issues for COVID, I created a mulligan system, and mulligan is a golfing term, sort of a redo option, where all students had 3 mulligans at the beginning of the year, and students could use those mulligans to get 24-hour extensions on any tests or projects. At the end of the year, they could have 4 mulligans to buy out that final project. And students could earn extra mulligans, because I didn't give them enough to buy out that project at the beginning, if they did extra activities throughout an extra for practice during the term. And so that created a differentiated learning opportunity. And so that worked really well. I'm not sure exactly how I'll carry it forward, but that idea of having students having a bit of flexibility on when things were handed in or giving that little bit of a buffer, that worked really well. And I definitely want to carry that forward. And the other element that really worked well with all the videos being, all content being fully online, was that students were better able to control the speed of content. Also helped with some accessibility issues, and also with English as a second language, where seeing the closed captioning can help students process the information. So that was also another good benefit to how the format was for this past year. So, and that ends my content. I'll stop